A German panzer commander stares through his periscope at the French countryside in 1940. His tank, a fortress of steel, has crushed everything in its path. Then a flash. A single projectile, no bigger than a man's forearm, strikes the hull. In an instant, a jet of molten metal punches through centimeters of armor plate like a hot needle through wax. The crew never sees what kills them. Across the battlefield, Allied soldiers whisper about a new weapon, something that defies logic, something that turns impenetrable steel into paper. They call it witchcraft. If you find stories like this fascinating, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. The story of the shaped charge is one of the most remarkable chapters in the history of warfare. It begins not on a battlefield but in a quiet laboratory in 1888. An American chemist named Charles Edward Monroe was conducting experiments with guncotton, a highly explosive compound used in naval warfare. During one test, he noticed something peculiar when he detonated a block of explosive that had letters stamped into its surface. Those letters appeared perfectly replicated on a steel plate placed beneath it. The explosion had somehow focused itself, carving the impressions into solid metal with surgical precision. Monroe had stumbled upon a principle that would change warfare forever. He discovered that a cavity or hollow in an explosive charge could focus the detonation's energy into a concentrated jet. This phenomenon became known as the Monroe effect. At the time, few understood its potential. The discovery was filed away, a curiosity for academic journals. Military planners showed little interest. After all, what use was a shaped indent in explosive when armies still relied on massed infantry and cavalry charges? For decades, the Monroe effect remained dormant. Scientists occasionally revisited the concept, publishing papers that gathered dust in university libraries. Then came the First World War, and with it, the tank. These lumbering steel beasts changed everything. Suddenly, armies needed ways to defeat armored vehicles. Machine guns were useless. Rifles bounced off harmlessly. Artillery could destroy a tank, but hitting a moving target required luck or overwhelming firepower. Infantry needed something portable, something that could be carried by a single soldier and still punch through armor plate. The problem seemed impossible. Physics dictated that penetrating steel required either tremendous kinetic energy or massive explosive force. A handheld weapon could deliver neither. The shells fired by anti-tank guns achieved penetration through sheer velocity, their hardened cores slamming into armor at hundreds of meters per second. But no soldier could carry a gun capable of generating such force. The mathematics simply didn't work. Enter the shaped charge. Engineers in multiple countries began revisiting Monroe's forgotten discovery. They realized that the key wasn't raw power, it was focus. A conventional explosive spreads its energy in all directions, wasting most of its force against the air. But a shaped charge concentrates that energy into a single point. The physics are elegant in their brutality. When a shaped charge detonates, the explosion collapses a metal liner, usually copper, inward at tremendous speed. This collapse creates a superplastic jet of metal traveling at nearly 10 kilometers per second. Nothing can withstand such focused fury. The Germans were among the first to weaponize this principle on a large scale. Their engineers developed the Panzerfaust, a simple tube that could be carried by any infantryman. Inside sat a shaped charge warhead. The weapon required minimal training. Point at the tank, pull the trigger, watch the steel giant die. German soldiers called it the tank fist. Allied tankers called it a death sentence, but the shaped charge wasn't limited to anti-tank warfare. Military planners quickly recognized its potential for demolition work. Bridges, bunkers, fortifications, anything made of steel or reinforced concrete could be destroyed with surgical precision. Traditional demolition required massive quantities of explosive, carefully placed and wired together. A shaped charge could accomplish the same destruction with a fraction of the material. The implications for bridge destruction were particularly significant. Bridges represented critical infrastructure. An army without bridges cannot move, supplies cannot flow, reinforcements cannot arrive. Throughout history, retreating armies had destroyed bridges to slow their pursuers, but demolishing a steel bridge was no simple task. The massive I-beams and girders that supported these structures required tremendous force to sever. Conventional explosives often failed to cut cleanly, leaving bridges damaged but passable. Shaped charges changed the calculus entirely. A demolition team could attach a linear-shaped charge to a bridge girder and cut through solid steel in milliseconds. The jet of copper plasma sliced through metal the way a blowtorch cuts through butter, but infinitely faster. Engineers who witnessed these demonstrations struggled to believe their eyes. Steel beams that should have required hours of cutting with acetylene torches were severed in the blink of an eye. The term witchcraft appeared in more than one after-action report. The science behind this apparent magic lies in fluid dynamics. At the extreme pressures generated by a shaped charge detonation, solid metal behaves like a liquid. The copper liner doesn't melt in the traditional sense. Instead, it flows, propelled by the expanding gases into a needle-thin jet. This jet maintains coherence over a remarkable distance, allowing it to penetrate materials many times the diameter of the charge itself. A shaped charge the size of a coffee can could punch through armor plate as thick as a man's torso. German engineers refined the technology throughout the war. They developed specialized charges for different applications. Anti-tank weapons required deep penetration through relatively thin targets. Bunker-busting charges needed to defeat thick concrete before reaching their targets. Bridge demolition charges were optimized for cutting steel beams rather than penetrating armor. Each variant represented a careful balance of explosive composition, liner geometry, and standoff distance. Standoff distance proved crucial. A shaped charge performs best when detonated at a specific distance from its target. Too close, and the jet hasn't fully formed. Too far, and the jet loses coherence. German engineers discovered that the optimal standoff was approximately 1 to 2 times the charge diameter. This knowledge shaped weapon design for generations. The distinctive pointed nose of many anti-tank missiles exists, not for aerodynamic reasons, but to ensure proper standoff distance at the moment of impact. The Allies scrambled to match German advances. British scientists worked feverishly to reverse engineer captured weapons. American researchers conducted their own experiments, often arriving at similar solutions through independent investigation. The PIAT, the Projector Infantry Anti-Tank, gave British soldiers their own shaped charge weapon. The American bazooka became iconic, its distinctive tube-launched rocket carrying a shaped charge warhead that could defeat any German tank. These weapons transformed infantry tactics. For millennia, foot soldiers had been helpless against armored opponents. Knights in plate mail had dominated medieval battlefields precisely because infantry lacked weapons capable of penetrating their protection. Tanks represented the modern equivalent of armored cavalry, seemingly invulnerable to anything a single soldier could carry. Shaped charges shattered that invulnerability. Now any infantryman could become a tank killer. This is a good moment to pause and remind you that if you're enjoying this deep dive into military history, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us create more content like this. Now, let's continue with our story. The psychological impact on tank crews was profound. These men had grown accustomed to their vehicle's protective embrace. The thick armor that surrounded them offered psychological comfort as much as physical protection. Inside their steel shells, they felt invincible. The advent of infantry portable shaped charge weapons shattered that illusion. Suddenly, every bush could conceal death. Every rubble pile might hide a soldier with a Panzerfaust. Tank crews became paranoid, understandably so. The Germans suffered particularly badly as the war progressed. Their tanks, once the terror of Europe, became death traps on the Eastern Front. Soviet soldiers received shaped charge weapons in enormous quantities. The RPG, the rocket-propelled grenade, became a symbol of Soviet infantry firepower. These weapons were crude by German standards, but they worked. A single soldier could destroy a Tiger tank worth hundreds of thousands of Reichsmarks. The economics of warfare had shifted decisively. Bridge warfare took on new dimensions as well. Both sides recognized the strategic importance of controlling river crossings. The Rhine, the Vistula, the Danube. These great rivers had served as natural barriers for centuries. Bridges across them became objectives of the highest priority. The Germans rigged every bridge with demolition charges, ready to destroy them at a moment's notice. The Allies developed elaborate plans to capture bridges intact, knowing that even a single, undamaged crossing could accelerate their advance by weeks. The Battle of Remagen in March 1945 illustrated the stakes perfectly. The Ludendorff Bridge across the Rhine was supposed to be demolished. German engineers had prepared shaped charges to sever the massive steel spans, but the charges failed. Some didn't detonate, others cut partially through the girders, but didn't complete the destruction. American soldiers rushed across the damaged but standing bridge, establishing a critical bridgehead on the eastern bank. The reasons for the German failure remain debated. Some historians blame faulty explosives, degraded by years of war and supply shortages. Others point to confusion among the defenders, who couldn't decide when to trigger the demolitions. A few suggest sabotage by German soldiers who knew the war was lost and saw no point in further destruction. Whatever the cause, the bridge's survival shortened the war by weeks. Thousands of lives hung on the performance of a few shaped charges. The British developed their own specialized bridge demolition charges. The beehive charge, named for its distinctive shape, could cut through bridge components with remarkable efficiency. These weapons allowed small commando teams to destroy bridges that would have previously required truckloads of conventional explosive. A four-man team could carry enough beehive charges to drop a 100-meter span. The mathematics of demolition had been transformed. Commandos and Special Operations Forces embraced shaped charge technology enthusiastically. The Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, America's wartime intelligence agency, equipped its agents with miniaturized shaped charges for sabotage missions. These devices could destroy railway switches, sever communication cables, or disable vehicles. A single agent carrying a small satchel of shaped charges could accomplish more destruction than a bomber squadron. The Norwegian resistance used shaped charges to devastating effect against German occupation forces. The famous heavy water sabotage mission relied in part on shaped charge technology to destroy German nuclear research facilities. Resistance fighters throughout occupied Europe learned to manufacture improvised shaped charges using materials scavenged from crashed aircraft and abandoned munitions. The knowledge spread through underground networks, teaching ordinary civilians to build weapons that could defeat tanks. German engineers attempted countermeasures. They developed spaced armor, a simple but effective defense that disrupted the shaped charge jet before it could fully form. By placing a thin outer plate a few centimeters from the main armor, they forced the jet to form prematurely, dissipating its energy before reaching the critical inner protection. American and Soviet engineers responded with tandem warheads, shaped charges that fired in sequence. The first charge defeated the spaced armor. The second penetrated the main protection. This cat-and-mouse game continues to this day. Modern tanks bristle with reactive armor, ceramic composites, and active protection systems designed to defeat shaped charge threats. Modern anti-tank missiles carry sophisticated warheads capable of penetrating a meter of solid steel. The descendants of Charles Monroe's laboratory curiosity have become some of the most lethal weapons on the modern battlefield. The science behind shaped charges also found peaceful applications. Mining engineers realized that the same principle used to destroy tanks could be used to fracture rock. Controlled blasting with shaped charges allowed miners to excavate tunnels with unprecedented precision. The technique spread to construction, where shaped charges enable the controlled demolition of buildings, bridges, and other structures. The implosions that bring down condemned skyscrapers rely on shaped charge technology originally developed for warfare. Oil field engineers discovered that shaped charges could perforate well casings deep underground. These perforating charges allow oil and gas to flow into well bores, enabling extraction from previously unreachable deposits. The petroleum industry consumes millions of shaped charges annually. Every time someone fills their car with gasoline, they benefit indirectly from technology developed to kill tank crews. The metallurgy of shaped charge liners became its own specialized field. Copper remained the material of choice for most applications, but engineers experimented with alternatives. Molybdenum liners produced jets with exceptional coherence, capable of defeating even the thickest armor. Depleted uranium provided both excellent penetration and incendiary effects, the jet igniting flammable materials inside the target. Glass liners created fragmentation effects useful against personnel. Each material offered different characteristics for different applications. Manufacturing precision proved critical. A shaped charge liner must be perfectly symmetrical. Any deviation causes the jet to tumble, dramatically reducing penetration. Wartime production struggled to maintain necessary tolerances. German quality control deteriorated as the war progressed, with predictable effects on weapon performance. The Americans and British invested heavily in precision manufacturing, ensuring their shaped charges performed consistently. The temperature of the liner material at the moment of detonation also affected performance. Cold charges penetrated better than warm ones, a quirk of metallurgy that commanders learned to exploit. Soviet tankers in winter learned to fear enemy anti-tank weapons more than their summer counterparts. The bitter cold that made life miserable for infantry actually enhanced the lethality of their shaped charge weapons. Training programs emphasized proper weapon handling. A shaped charge positioned incorrectly would fail to penetrate. Too much standoff or too little could mean the difference between destroying a tank and merely annoying its crew. Soldiers practiced endlessly, learning to place charges quickly and accurately under fire. The knowledge was life-saving, both for the soldiers employing the weapons and for their comrades depending on them to stop enemy armor. Let's pause here for another reminder. If you're finding this exploration of military technology interesting, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Now back to our story. The tactical implications of shaped charges extended beyond individual weapons. Entire defensive doctrines were rewritten to account for infantry anti-tank capability. The traditional armor breakthrough, where tanks smashed through defensive lines to rampage in the enemy rear, became increasingly costly. Defenders equipped with shaped charge weapons could create anti-tank kill zones that devoured armored formations. The mass tank attacks of 1940 became suicidal by 1944. German defensive doctrine evolved accordingly. Instead of trying to stop Allied armor at the front line, German commanders created defense in depth. Multiple lines of positions, each equipped with anti-tank weapons, bled attacking formations as they advanced. Even when breakthroughs occurred, the attackers emerged weakened, their tank strength depleted by accumulated losses to shaped charge weapons. The Soviets developed different tactics. Their doctrine emphasized overwhelming numbers, accepting losses that would have paralyzed Western armies. Soviet planners calculated that even if each German anti-tank team destroyed one tank before being eliminated, the Red Army could still achieve breakthrough through sheer numerical superiority. The math was brutal but effective. Soviet tank production outpaced German anti-tank capability by factors of 5 or more. American doctrine fell somewhere between the European extremes. American commanders valued their soldiers' lives highly, but also recognized the need for aggressive action. They developed combined arms tactics that integrated infantry, armor, and artillery into mutually supporting teams. Tank-infantry cooperation became a doctrinal obsession. Tanks provided firepower to eliminate infantry. Infantry provided protection against shaped charge weapons. Each arm covered the other's vulnerabilities. The Pacific theater presented different challenges. Japanese forces received shaped charge weapons, but in limited quantities. Their industrial base couldn't match American or German production capacity. Instead, Japanese defenders relied on suicidal tactics, soldiers with explosives strapped to their bodies rushing American tanks. These human-guided shape charges proved terrifyingly effective at close range. American tankers in the Pacific developed a particular horror of Japanese infantry attacks. The kamikaze concept extended to anti-tank warfare in ways that still disturb historians. Japanese soldiers would dig holes in roads, cover themselves with camouflage, and wait for tanks to pass overhead. Then they would detonate their charges, dying instantly while destroying the vehicle above them. The practice reflected Japanese military culture's emphasis on death before dishonor, but also desperate pragmatism. Japan lacked the industrial capacity to produce enough conventional anti-tank weapons. Human determination substituted for manufacturing capability. Naval warfare also felt the impact of shaped charge technology. Torpedoes had long used conventional explosive warheads, relying on the pressure of underwater detonation to rupture ship hulls. But some designers experimented with shaped charge torpedo warheads. These weapons could punch through anti-torpedo blisters and reach a ship's vital compartments directly. The devastating effectiveness of some late-war torpedo attacks may have resulted from shaped charge warheads, though records remain incomplete. Aircraft-delivered shaped charges presented another application. Conventional bombs spread their explosive force in all directions, wasteful when the target was a single tank or bunker. Aircraft-mounted shaped charges could focus that force, dramatically increasing effectiveness against hardened targets. The Germans developed the SD-2, a small bomb with a shaped charge warhead designed specifically for attacking tanks. A single aircraft could carry dozens of these weapons, each one capable of destroying an armored vehicle. The British developed the Piat for airborne forces specifically because paratroopers couldn't carry conventional anti-tank guns. The Piat was heavy and awkward, but it worked. At Arnhem, British paratroopers used Piats to destroy German armored vehicles that would otherwise have overwhelmed them. The weapon gave lightly armed airborne troops a fighting chance against mechanized opponents, fundamentally changing the calculus of airborne operations. American paratroopers carried bazookas for the same reason. The D-Day airborne assault saw extensive use of shaped charge weapons against German armor. Paratroopers landing behind enemy lines found themselves facing tanks without conventional anti-tank support. The bazooka gave them options. A single soldier with a bazooka and a few rockets could establish a blocking position capable of stopping an armored counterattack. This capability made airborne operations strategically viable in ways they hadn't been before. The Eastern Front saw the most intensive use of shaped charge weapons. The vast spaces of Russia demanded mobile warfare, and mobile warfare meant tanks. Both sides deployed armored forces on scales unprecedented in human history. At Kursk in 1943, thousands of tanks clashed in the greatest armored battle ever fought. Shaped charge weapons played a crucial role in the defensive success of Soviet forces. German tank losses during the offensive were catastrophic, many of them to infantry-portable anti-tank weapons. Soviet industrial planning prioritized anti-tank weapon production. Factories that once made tractors now turned out millions of shaped charge grenades. Training programs taught every soldier basic anti-tank tactics. The concept of the anti-tank rifle evolved into the anti-tank grenade launcher, a weapon any infantry squad could carry. This democratization of anti-tank capability transformed the battlefield fundamentally and permanently. German responses grew increasingly desperate. Engineers developed the Panzerschreck, a larger, more powerful version of the American bazooka copied from captured examples. They created the Panzerfaust, a single-shot disposable weapon simple enough to be manufactured by slave labor. Production numbers soared into the millions. By 1945, even Hitler Youth members were equipped with Panzerfausts, children sent to die destroying Soviet tanks with weapons they barely understood. The human cost was staggering. Tank crews died in their thousands, incinerated when shaped charge jets ignited fuel and ammunition. Infantry anti-tank teams died in even greater numbers. The survival rate for soldiers attacking tanks measured in single engagements. The weapons were effective, but not safe for their users. A Panzerfaust had an effective range of perhaps 30 meters against a moving tank. Getting that close required extraordinary courage or desperate circumstances. Veterans' accounts describe the terror of anti-tank combat. Tank crews speak of watching friends die, their vehicles transformed into crematoriums in seconds. Infantry speak of rushing tanks, knowing that most of them wouldn't survive. The shaped charge created new forms of battlefield horror, new ways to die in the industrial slaughter of modern warfare. The weapons were effective precisely because they were so destructive. Medical personnel faced challenges they'd never anticipated. Shaped charge wounds presented unique characteristics. The superheated jets caused burns unlike anything seen before. The pressures involved created blast injuries at ranges that should have been safe. Survivors often suffered long-term effects from their injuries, their bodies never fully recovering from the violence they'd endured. Post-war analysis revealed the full impact of shaped charge technology. Tank losses attributable to infantry anti-tank weapons exceeded those from tank versus tank combat in many theaters. The traditional image of armored warfare, tanks dueling across open ground, was increasingly fictional. Real tank casualties came from infantry hiding in buildings, hedgerows, and rubble. The humble shaped charge rocket had democratized tank killing. Military planners drew appropriate conclusions. Post-war tank design emphasized protection against shaped charge threats. Armor configurations evolved to defeat the focused jets. New materials promised improved protection without excessive weight. The eternal competition between offensive and defensive technologies continued. Shaped charges driving innovation in armor, armor driving innovation in shaped charges. The Cold War accelerated this competition. Both superpowers invested heavily in anti-tank technology. The Soviet RPG-7 became the most widely produced anti-tank weapon in history, its shaped charge warhead threatening every tank on the planet. American engineers developed the Tau missile, a guided weapon carrying a shaped charge capable of defeating the thickest Soviet armor. The arms race extended into every aspect of shaped charge technology. Modern shaped charges bear little resemblance to their World War II ancestors. Computer-designed liners achieve penetration performance that wartime engineers would have considered impossible. Tandem warheads defeat reactive armor that would have stopped earlier designs. Precursor charges clear the way for main penetrators. Top attack weapons strike tank roofs, the weakest part of armored vehicles. The technology continues evolving, each generation more lethal than the last. But the fundamental principle remains unchanged. Charles Monroe's discovery in 1888 still underlies every shaped charge weapon in service today. The physics of focused explosive force The behavior of metals under extreme pressure, the formation of superplastic jets, these phenomena operate today exactly as they did 8 decades ago. Understanding has deepened, but the basic science remains constant. The shaped charge stands as one of the most significant military innovations of the 20th century. It transformed infantry from helpless observers of armored combat into active participants. It changed defensive doctrine, offensive tactics, and the design of virtually every armored vehicle. It enabled special operations that would otherwise have been impossible. It shortened World War II by enabling bridge destruction and capture operations that accelerated Allied advances. The soldiers who employed these weapons rarely understood the physics involved. They knew only that their rockets could kill tanks. That knowledge was enough. The science could wait for peacetime analysis. In the heat of combat, what mattered was effectiveness, and shaped charges were devastatingly effective. Those who witnessed shaped charge weapons in action struggled to describe what they saw. Steel that should have been impenetrable simply wasn't. Armor plate that had stopped everything else yielded instantly. The phenomenon seemed to violate common sense. Metal couldn't behave like water. Explosions couldn't focus themselves into needles of destruction. Yet they did, over and over, across every battlefield of the war. The term witchcraft appears repeatedly in contemporary accounts, not as superstition, but as metaphor. The soldiers and engineers who used these weapons understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. They reached for language that captured their amazement. Magic was the only frame of reference that seemed appropriate. In the end, the shaped charge wasn't magic at all. It was science, carefully applied to the problem of penetrating armor. Charles Monroe's accidental discovery had revealed a fundamental truth about explosive physics. Wartime engineers had transformed that truth into weapons of unprecedented lethality. The synthesis of basic research and applied engineering had produced a technology that changed warfare forever. The bridges that fell to shaped charges, the tanks that burned, the bunkers that crumbled, all testified to the power of focused force. The soldiers who called it witchcraft were wrong about the mechanism, but right about the effect. Shaped charges really did seem supernatural to those who witnessed them. That they operated through physics rather than magic made them no less remarkable. Today, every soldier carries descendants of those wartime weapons. Every tank incorporates protection designed to defeat them. Every military doctrine accounts for their presence on the battlefield. The shaped charge has become so fundamental to modern warfare that imagining combat without it requires conscious effort. Yet barely a century ago, the technology didn't exist. The story of the shaped charge reminds us that the most transformative innovations often begin with accidents. Charles Monroe wasn't trying to create a weapon when he noticed letter impressions in steel plate. He was simply curious about an unexpected phenomenon. That curiosity, pursued through decades of research and development, eventually produced weapons that reshaped the world. The secret shell that split steel bridges so fast they called it witchcraft was never really a secret at all. The physics had been published in scientific journals for anyone to read. The mystery lay not in hidden knowledge, but in the application of known principles to new problems. The engineers who developed shaped charge weapons weren't wizards. They were simply people who understood what focused force could accomplish. Their legacy surrounds us still in weapons and tools and industrial applications they never imagined. The focused explosive jet cuts rock in mines, perforates oil wells, demolishes buildings, and continues to threaten armored vehicles everywhere. Charles Monroe's curiosity about impressed letters in steel plate echoes through every application, a reminder that the most profound discoveries often come from paying attention to unexpected results. If this deep dive into military history has captured your attention, please subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you won't miss future explorations of the weapons, tactics, and technologies that shaped our world. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on shaped charge technology or suggesting other topics you'd like us to explore. Your engagement drives this channel forward, and we're grateful for every subscriber who joins us on these journeys into history. The shaped charge that seemed like witchcraft was always just physics, waiting to be understood and applied. That understanding changed everything. It always does.